Sandra called Keanu a blessing. From the very first moment, people in the room felt something strange in the air, something soft and warm, like a quiet emotion that touched the heart before the mind could understand it. Cameras were rolling, lights were glowing, and the audience whispered among themselves. They all knew Sandra Bullock was about to speak, but no one expected her voice to shake the room the way it did. She looked at Keanu for a long moment, her eyes full of memories, full of something unspoken, and then she said in a voice so gentle it made the whole studio fall silent, "You are a blessing, Keanu." And the second those words left her mouth, everyone felt it. They felt the honesty, the respect, the years of unbroken friendship, and something deeper, maybe even something both of them never dared to say out loud. Keanu did not smile fast like most people. He stayed still, quiet, almost frozen in surprise, as if the words hit something inside him that he kept locked away. He lowered his eyes slowly, not out of shyness but out of humility. He never believed he was special. He always said he was just a regular man trying his best to be kind in a world that sometimes forgot what kindness looked like. But in that moment, the whole world saw something rare. They saw a man who had walked through loss, heartbreak, and loneliness, now hearing one of the most respected women in Hollywood call him a blessing. And it felt like something inside him softened before everyone's eyes. The audience leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening beneath the quiet smiles and the long pause. Sandra continued speaking, her voice trembling slightly as she talked about the early years, their movie together, the long nights on set, the jokes they shared when the cameras were off, and how she always believed there was something different about him, something pure. She said she watched him choose kindness even when no one was watching, watched him help crew members, watched him share food, watched him carry heavy boxes that were not his job to carry. She said most people only saw the star, but she saw the human being behind the star, the man who always put others before himself. Keanu listened with a calm expression, but his hands were tight together, almost like he was keeping himself from feeling too much. He had been praised before, but praise always made him uncomfortable. He believed actions mattered more than words. But still, there was something in Sandra's tone that made him look up slowly with eyes that carried both pain and gratitude. He whispered a soft thank you, but his voice cracked in the middle, revealing a depth of emotion he rarely showed in public. And that small break in his voice made the audience's hearts twist a little. Then something unexpected happened. The host asked Keanu what Sandra meant to him, and instead of giving a simple answer, Keanu took a long breath, like he was searching through memories he kept hidden from the world. He said she was one of the few people who stayed real with him, who treated him like a human, not like a star. He said she brought light into dark moments without even knowing it. He said when he lost someone important, she checked on him without asking for anything in return. The room turned silent again, heavier this time, filled with emotion no one prepared for. And just when people thought the moment had reached its peak, Keanu said something that made Sandra's eyes fill with tears. He said, "You called me a blessing, but you have no idea how many days you were the only reason I kept going." The audience gasped softly. Sandra covered her mouth. The host froze in shock. And everyone knew the story was only beginning. The truth behind their quiet bond. The moment Keanu said those words, the entire room changed. It was as if the lights dimmed on their own, as if the sound around them softened, and all that remained was this deep emotional thread connecting the two of them. People in the audience shifted in their seats, some even held their breath. They knew something powerful was about to unfold, something raw and honest, something that did not happen often on camera. The host leaned forward, sensing a story that had never been shared before. Sandra wiped a small tear from the corner of her eye, trying to keep her voice steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she looked at Keanu with a mixture of concern and warmth. Keanu sat quietly for a moment, his eyes distant like he was seeing a memory only he could understand. He did not rush, he did not hide behind jokes, and he did not pretend to be fine the way most celebrities did. Instead, he took a slow breath and said in a low voice that almost broke, "There was a time when I thought I had no one left, and you showed up, Sandra, not as a co-star, not as a famous actress, just as a friend." The audience reacted with a quiet murmur because many people knew Keanu had lived through painful losses, but they never knew the full story. Sandra looked at him with soft eyes and said, "You never told me how much it meant to you." Her tone was filled with guilt, sadness, and something deeper, something protective. She reached out and placed her hand gently on top of his, a small gesture, but it carried so much weight that the cameras zoomed in slowly, capturing the emotion that words couldn't describe. Keanu gave her a small smile, one of those soft ones that never tried to hide the pain behind it. "I didn't know how to say it," he whispered. Back then, I was standing on a very thin line. Everything felt heavy. Every day felt the same. And then you made me feel seen. You reminded me that kindness still existed. Sandra's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to respond, but the words got stuck in her throat. She squeezed his hand gently, holding it with both of hers now. The audience felt the tension, the emotion, the unspoken truth that lay between them. They were not a couple. They were not lovers. They were something else, something deeper, something rare, something built on shared pain, shared empathy, and quiet moments that the world never saw. Then Sandra did something unexpected. She asked the host if she could share a story, one she had never talked about publicly. The host nodded, surprised but curious. Sandra took a long breath and said, "There was a night on set years ago. We were filming late, everyone was tired, and it was freezing. I remember shivering so much I couldn't feel my fingers, and without saying a word, Keanu left for a moment and came back with a blanket and a hot drink. He didn't make a big gesture. He didn't expect a thank you. He just placed the blanket over me and said, 'You looked cold.' It was simple but powerful." Keanu's cheeks turned a little red and he looked away shyly. He never liked attention for his kindness. The audience laughed softly, touched by the quiet sweetness of the moment. But Sandra wasn't done. Her voice grew heavier as she added, "But what I didn't know was that he gave me the only blanket he had. He stayed cold the whole night. He didn't tell anyone. I only found out years later." The room froze. Even the cameras seemed to hold still. Keanu looked embarrassed, almost uncomfortable, as if he didn't want the world to see this side of him. "It wasn't a big deal," he said quietly. "You needed it more." Sandra shook her head slowly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You always say that, Keanu. You always act like your pain doesn't matter, but it does, and you matter more than you know." The audience fell silent again, drawn deeper into the emotional truth unfolding before them. And they all realized something important. This was not just a friendship. This was a healing. And it was far from over. The night everything changed for Keanu. The audience still sat in silence, their eyes locked on Keanu and Sandra, as if everyone feared that moving too quickly might break the fragile moment holding the room together. The host looked overwhelmed, unsure whether to ask another question or simply let them speak from their hearts. Before he could decide, Keanu took a slow breath, lifted his eyes from the floor, and looked at Sandra with a softness that held years of unspoken gratitude. "There is something I never told you," Keanu said quietly. His voice was calm, but the tension in the room tightened instantly. Sandra leaned forward, her hands still wrapped around his, her expression filled with worry and curiosity. "What is it?" she whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Keanu hesitated. His jaw tightened slightly, the way it did when he tried to keep his emotions under control. The audience sensed the weight of the story he carried. It was not a simple memory. It was something deeper, something that shaped him. Finally, he said, "It was the night after we finished shooting that bridge scene. You remember the one. It was the day I was supposed to be happy, but inside I felt like everything was falling apart." Sandra nodded slowly, though she did not know the details. She only remembered he had been quiet that night, quieter than usual. Keanu continued, "When I left the set, I went home to an empty place. The silence was too loud. I sat on the floor for hours, thinking about life, thinking about the people I had lost, thinking about whether I could keep moving forward. And then my phone rang." Sandra's eyes widened. "That was the night I called you?" she whispered, remembering it now. Keanu nodded. "Yes, you called me out of nowhere. You said you were just checking on me because something felt off. You said you didn't know why, but you felt I needed someone to talk to." He paused, swallowing hard. "That call saved me, Sandra. I was in a very dark place, and your voice pulled me back." The audience gasped softly. Sandra covered her mouth with her hand, shocked, emotional, struggling to breathe evenly. "Keanu, I didn't know it was that serious. You didn't tell me." "I didn't know how," Keanu whispered. "But that night, you gave me a reason to stay. You reminded me that someone cared. You stayed on the phone with me for almost 2 hours, talking about nothing and everything. And when I hung up, I felt like I could breathe again." Sandra's eyes filled with tears immediately. She looked away for a second, wiping her cheek, then looked back at him with a trembling smile full of pain and affection. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly. Keanu shook his head. "You did. You were there. Sometimes that is the most special thing a person can do." The audience felt a deep ache in their hearts. This was not scripted. This was real. Two people sharing a private truth in a public room because the moment demanded honesty. The host wiped his own eyes without shame. This was no longer an interview. This was two souls opening old wounds with trust and respect. Sandra took both of Keanu's hands now, holding them tightly as if she feared losing him in the memory. "I am so sorry you went through that alone," she whispered. Keanu gave a sad smile. "I wasn't alone, not after you called." A long silence filled the studio again, but it was warm this time, full of human connection instead of fear. Then Sandra spoke again, her voice shaky but full of strength. "I wish I had known. I would have come over. I would have stayed with you." Keanu looked at her with deep emotion. "I know, that's why you were the blessing." The audience felt the impact of those words all at once. It was a moment that would stay in their hearts long after the cameras stopped rolling. And none of them knew that the biggest twist was yet to come. A confession Sandra never expected. The silence that filled the studio after Keanu's words was deeper than anything that had happened before. People in the audience had tears in their eyes, and even the crew members behind the cameras stood frozen, listening. Sandra stared at Keanu with a softness that held shock, sadness, and something protective, almost fierce. She took a slow breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions building inside her, but her voice still shook when she finally spoke. "Keanu," she whispered, "why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you keep that pain to yourself?" Keanu looked down for a long moment, his fingers moving slightly in her hands, as if he was trying to find the right words. Finally, he said in a quiet, honest voice, "I never wanted to burden you. You already carry so much. You always had a smile for everyone, even when you were tired. I didn't want to be one more heavy thing on your shoulders." Sandra shook her head slowly, tears slipping down her face. "You were never a burden, never. You were one of the few people who made everything feel lighter." Keanu lifted his eyes to her, and the look he gave her made people in the audience hold their breath again. There was gratitude in his eyes, but also a sadness that came from years of holding everything inside. "I didn't know that," he whispered. "I just tried to keep going." The host cleared his throat gently, sensing that there was more to be said, something waiting beneath the surface. "Keanu," he asked softly, "was that the only moment Sandra helped you through, or was there more?" Keanu gave a small, almost reluctant smile, the kind that hinted at memories he never shared with the world. "There was one more time," he said. "A night she doesn't remember." Sandra's eyebrows lifted in confusion. "I don't remember what night." Keanu hesitated, his voice softer than ever. "The night before your big award ceremony, everyone saw you smiling, everyone saw you shining, but what they didn't see was you sitting on the steps outside the studio crying." Sandra froze, the audience gasped, the host leaned back in surprise. Keanu continued gently, "You thought no one would see you. You hid your face in your hands, you were overwhelmed, tired, scared, you felt alone, and I found you there. I sat beside you and stayed with you until you could breathe again." Sandra opened her mouth, shocked. She whispered, "That was you? I always thought the person who sat beside me was a crew member. I never saw the face, I never knew." Keanu nodded. "You didn't look up, you just needed someone to sit with you, so I didn't say anything. I didn't want you to feel embarrassed." Sandra covered her face with her hands for a moment, overwhelmed by the truth. When she lowered them again, her eyes were full of emotion. "You never told me. Why?" Keanu smiled softly. "Because it wasn't about me, it was about you. Sometimes people don't need a hero, they just need a warm silence." The audience broke. Some cried, some wiped their faces quietly. Sandra pressed a hand to her chest as if her heart hurt too much to hold. She whispered, "You were there for me, even when I didn't know it." Keanu nodded again, "Just like you were there for me." But then something unexpected happened. Sandra leaned closer, her voice trembling with something new, something deeper. "Keanu, has anyone ever told you how much you matter? How much you change the lives around you without even trying?" Keanu looked down. "Not really." Sandra reached out, cupped his cheek gently, and said in a soft voice full of emotion, "Then I will. You matter more than you think. You matter to the world, and you matter to me." The audience gasped sharply. The host froze. And Keanu's eyes filled with tears he tried desperately to hide. That moment changed the whole direction of the interview and their lives. The biggest reveal was still waiting in the shadows. The reveal that stunned the whole world. The studio lights felt warmer now, almost too warm, as if the air itself grew thick with emotion. The audience did not move, did not blink, did not even whisper. Sandra's words hung in the space between her and Keanu like a soft beam of light, something fragile and powerful at the same time. Keanu looked down, fighting the rising emotion in his chest. He was a quiet man, a humble man, someone who rarely allowed the world to see what he felt. But this moment broke through every wall he had built. He wiped a tear quickly, trying to hide it, but the cameras caught the gentle shake of his hand. Sandra saw it and instinctively reached for him again, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't romantic. It was human. Deeply, honestly human, and the world watching knew it. The host tried to speak, but his voice cracked, so he cleared his throat and tried again. "Keanu, is there something you want to say back to Sandra?" It was a simple question, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken years. Keanu looked up slowly. His eyes were soft, watery, and full of something so sincere that even the sound crew felt their hearts twist. He took a breath, one of those long ones that meant the truth was about to come out. "There is something," he said quietly. "Something I never said because I didn't know if it was my place." Sandra leaned in, her eyes locked on his. "Tell me," she whispered. Keanu hesitated, then spoke with a vulnerable honesty that stunned the room. "There were days when your kindness was the only light I saw. People think you saved me once, but you didn't. You saved me many times. Your laughter carried me. Your messages reached me exactly when I needed them. You kept me alive during moments no one knew I was struggling." The audience gasped. Sandra covered her mouth. The host froze again. Keanu continued, his voice trembling. "I never said anything because you had your own battles. You were hurting too. I didn't want to add my pain to yours." Sandra's voice broke as she whispered, "Keanu, you never added pain, you added hope." Those words hit him hard. He dropped his gaze again, breathing slowly as if controlling a wave inside him. The audience leaned even closer, sensing another confession coming. And then came the twist. Keanu lifted his head and said, "There was a letter." Sandra blinked. "A letter?" "Yes," Keanu said, "one you never knew about, one I wrote years ago." The audience reacted instantly. Some leaned forward, others put hands over their hearts. Sandra's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You wrote me a letter." Keanu nodded slowly. "I wrote it during one of the darkest weeks of my life. I didn't know how to talk, I didn't know how to ask for help, so I wrote everything down, every feeling, every fear, every memory of you that helped me keep going, but I never sent it." Sandra's voice shook. "Why not?" Keanu's lips trembled as he answered, "Because I didn't want you to worry about me. I didn't want to pull you into my sadness. I just needed to say thank you, even if you never read it." The entire studio felt tears rising. Even the cameramen looked emotional. Sandra reached out, held his hand firmly, and whispered, "Keanu, I wish you had sent it. You didn't need to hide from me." He gave her a sad smile. "I didn't hide because I didn't trust you. I hid because I didn't trust myself." The host leaned in, overwhelmed. "Keanu, what was in the letter? What did you write?" Keanu hesitated. The room waited. The audience held their breath. And then, in a trembling voice, he said the words that shocked everyone. "I wrote that meeting Sandra was the moment my life began to heal." Gasps filled the room. Sandra's eyes filled with tears instantly. Her lips parted, trembling as if she couldn't believe what she just heard. Their hands tightened together. And that was when Sandra said something no one expected, something that would change everything in Part 6. The moment that made the world cry. Gasps still echoed softly across the studio as Keanu's final words settled into the air. People held their hands over their hearts. Some wiped tears away without shame. The host stared as if he couldn't believe he was witnessing something so raw, so unfiltered. Sandra, however, seemed completely lost in the moment. Her eyes were locked on Keanu, searching his face, trying to process the truth he had carried alone for so many years. She leaned closer, her voice soft, a whisper full of trembling emotion. "Keanu, I had no idea my presence meant so much to you." He gave a gentle smile, one that held both gratitude and sadness. "You didn't need to know, you were just being you, kind, pure, real, that was enough." But Sandra shook her head slowly, tears shining in her eyes. "No, it wasn't enough, because you were helping me too, Keanu. You think you were the only one healing, but you were. I had nights where I broke down, days when I felt empty inside, moments where I doubted everything, and you always showed up even when you didn't know it." Keanu frowned softly. "How?" Sandra took a deep breath, steadying her voice. There were days when your messages came at the perfect time, days when your quiet strength reminded me to keep going, days when your presence made me feel safe. I never told you this, but I was healing because of you too. The audience reacted with a soft, emotional sigh. The host wiped a tear from his own eye. Keanu looked shocked, almost confused, as if he couldn't believe Sandra felt that way. "I helped you," he whispered. "Yes," she answered gently. "You helped me more than you will ever understand." A heavy silence filled the space, but it wasn't painful. It was warm, comforting, sacred. Two people who had spent years lifting each other without even realizing it were finally speaking the truth. Then the host asked the question everyone wanted to know, but no one dared to say. "What kept you two connected all these years? What made your bond so strong?" Keanu took a moment, thinking deeply, then said something simple but powerful. "We never asked anything from each other. We only gave. And when two hearts give without expecting anything back, something unbreakable grows." The audience clapped softly, moved by the purity in his voice. But the biggest moment was still waiting. Sandra turned toward Keanu again and took both of his hands into hers. Her touch was steady now, filled with determination. Her voice was shaky but full of truth. "Keanu, I want to say something I never said before." The host leaned in. The audience leaned in. The world seemed to lean in. Keanu looked at her gently. "What is it?" Sandra took a deep breath, and with tears rolling down her cheeks, she whispered, "You were not just a blessing in my life. You were the light that helped me survive my darkest years." Keanu's breath caught. The audience made a soft sound, something between a gasp and a cry. Sandra continued, her voice breaking open. "I never had the courage to tell you, but you saved me too. Maybe not with grand gestures, maybe not with big words, but with your heart, with your way of being, with your quiet kindness. You saved me, Keanu, as much as I saved you." Keanu lowered his head, overwhelmed. When he lifted it again, his eyes were full of tears he could no longer hide. He whispered, "Thank you, I didn't know." Sandra leaned forward, pressing her forehead gently against his, holding his hands tightly. And in a voice the entire world could feel, she said, "We healed each other. That is why I called you a blessing." The room erupted into soft applause, not loud, not wild, but full of love. The kind of applause that came from people witnessing something real. Keanu squeezed her hands and whispered, "Thank you for being my light." Sandra smiled through tears, "And thank you for being mine." Two souls, two journeys, two hearts that quietly carried each other through life without the world ever seeing the full story. Until today,